Correct, correct. You know, you have some scenarios like this one is just a small portion of the map, just right around Chickamauga Creek here, and then you have some where it's a full campaign that stretches 2 maps, several hundred miles. So you can see if you look up in the upper toolbar there, right next to the little picture of the camera, the overview window, you can actually see how big these 2 maps are together. So, you know, it's probably 40 or 50 hexes by maybe 100, so each one of them being about a mile. So you have a lot of maneuver room. Some of the campaigns really, you know, require you to move units very far afield through railroads and things like that. So getting all the units to battles is a key element. It takes several turns to do so. So, but getting back to the action cycle, which is the heart of this game, I said that whoever wins the initiative can essentially, they can move, they can activate a leader who can then activate several units to either move, or they can set up an assault, or they can do some of the other little things like burning and looting and pillaging. But at the basic level of this game is the movement, and for all things being equal, when we move a unit, we can say, for example, I'm going to select Gist here underneath Walker, and I'm going to activate them to move. So the first thing I would do is generate a fatigue marker. So the way that works is I right click on the unit and I place a fatigue marker. And the fatigue is sort of the basic timetable. It's the amount of effort that a particular unit can expend during the day. So each one of these turns is 1 day. And a unit starts at 0 fatigue, and they can have a max of 4. And they either get them through being activated in subsequent turns, or by taking damage during a combat. So it's possible that if they get into a combat situation, they're so disorganized that they will get completely fatigued for the rest of the day. So this is kind of the currency of the game, expending fatigue points as you move the units around. And optimizing the amount of fatigue you spend is really what's going to determine who the winner is in this game. So I've activated Gist by himself there, and what I would do to see how far he can move, I would roll a die. When I roll the die here, so I get a 1, which is not very good. All the Confederate units have an inherent +1 to movement, so whereas the Union would roll just a d6, the basic combat unit gets a d6 +1 for the Confederate side, so I would have 2 movement points that I can spend. Well, as you can see, there's a lot of different terrain types here. What you want to do, obviously, is move along a road, because if you move along roads or pikes or things like that, you can, it's pretty much a 1-to-1. You expend 1 movement point, you can move 1 hex along a road. So I would move him 2 hexes, which I'll do right now. Let's see, move him there. So he could move to 40-30 and then 41-30, because he traveled 2 hexes along that road network. That's not to say you can only travel by roads, but again, it's kind of a 1-to-1. That's the most expedient way to move forces around. But in a pinch, you can move units across hex sides. So if I were to move him, moving him back here, if I were to move him just say to 41-31 directly, then that's to move into a clear. If I look at my terrain chart, that's 3 movement points. So you want to manage your movement, obviously, as effectively as possible. If you roll crappy, like I just did, and you get a 1, any unit that's been activated can always move at least 1 hex adjacent, no matter what the cost is, with the exception of mountains and swamps. So I could move, let's say I didn't have enough to move into this rough territory here, I could always move the 1 hex, no matter what. And every time I activate a unit, let's say I'm going to move him again. I'm going to roll for initiative here again. So Union first, 4, Confederate gets a 4. So in this case, it would be a tie. This is one of those instances where in this game it would bring up the insubordination check. But I'll just assume it's a regular tie, and tie is going to the benefit of the Confederates. So I'm going to activate This time what I'm going to do instead is Walker is going to activate all 3 of the units in his range. And any leader has a 3-hex range that the units are within 3 hexes of him, provided they're not cut off by a zone of control, which I'll talk about in a minute, by the enemy. They can be activated. So Walker here is actually going to, he's going to set him, this one here, to the next level. So that's going to go to fatigue level 2. And then this guy right here will get, place a fatigue marker there for him, and the artillery. So all 3 of those units are now able to march. So I'm going to roll and see how far they get to go. And once again, I roll poorly. But now, with the other bonus of activating a leader is the Confederate leaders then add another +1 to your movement modifier. So in this case, he gives a +2. Now I have 3 total movement points that I can use. So I can move all of them now. So let's see, I want to move that unit to there and there, and bring them all the way up to this bridge. That's 3 hexes he can move. And I'll bring the artillery just 1 hex, because that's as far as they can move. And then I'll bring Walker and his unit around here. 1, 2, 3, like that. Okay. So if we're thinking in Monopoly terms, this game really is just a roll and move mechanic with modifiers. So if you get really lucky dice rolls, you get lots of 6s, your unit's going to be able to move further. So there is that luck dependency in this game. All the infantry moves at a d6 plus their modifiers. Up here at 40-30, I've got Pegram, and he is, he's a cavalry leader. So underneath him, this is Davidson, and you can see with just the slash in there that represents a cavalry unit. Arnold, no, this isn't an I go, you go. This is a completely initiative dice. So as soon as I finish my action, we roll for initiative again. And so it's possible if you get lucky dice rolls, you can get to go 3, 4, 5 actions in a row, and the other guy is just kind of stuck. So it's not a 1-for-1. It's completely dice driven. Such are the fortunes of war. With cavalry units, they roll 2d6. So let's say I wanted to activate Pegram. I could roll 2d6 up here, and he gets 2 and 2, and because he's a leader, he adds 2 to that, so he gets to move a total of 6 hexes. So I would add a fatigue marker for them, and then I'd say, okay, they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? And just lather, rinse, repeat. Movement is very, very simple. Now, you notice here this fatigue marker says, looking at the one with the 2 on it, it says extended march if exhausted. Well, I'm gonna bump it up 1 more to 3. You can see that there's this thing called the extended march. This is where there's a possibility of the guys are just marching so far during the day, start to fall apart, morale starting to suffer, and they're starting to get disorganized. What I would have to do is roll to see if this unit becomes disorganized. So as soon as I hit fatigue level 3 there, I'm going to roll a die, and I roll a 4, which is good, because if I get a 6, then that unit would then become, and I flip him over, disorganized like that. So it's possible just by marching that the core is going to kind of fall apart, just through stragglers. And it gets worse as the day goes on. So if they go to 4, that adds a +1 modifier. So let's say I was at +1 there and I roll again. Luckily I'm still okay. It's much harder on the Union. The Union suffers greatly from marching because their armies are so big and they're so disorganized that they have actually more modifiers, and it's easier for them to fall apart just in the marching. So that's one of the disadvantages the Union have. And also because they're slower. So they're more powerful, but they're slower and harder to get organized. So once a unit hits fatigue level 4 there, you can see it's done for the day. It just has to sit there. So, yes, Charles, you point out a very good thing. I'm going to open up the chart here. It's right next to the MV, the gray MV charts. And the first thing you do when you open up the chart, you can see to the right there is the extended march table. You can see that it tells you what's going to happen. Basically, if a unit is organized and they suffer from extended marching, then the first thing happens is they become disorganized. If you continue to do that and they get worse, if they're already disorganized, you actually start losing manpower, which is not good. So, and you can see some of the other modifiers there for if they're a Union, the Union Army modifiers, and if you have things like heat and advanced game scenarios, things like that. So it's quite possible that you will suffer mightily trying to get your units into play. But movement is only half of this game. It's a means to get your units into position to prosecute combat. And combat takes a little getting used to, but I'm going to go ahead and move Walker up here. Let's see, I'm going to put him right there, looking across the creek at the breastworks where Wood is and his unit. You can see that breastwork represents some kind of entrenchment, and that breastwork is worth a multiplier of 2. So that means that any manpower and any artillery that's located underneath it is double. So that unit is ostensibly a manpower 10 because they're so firmly entrenched. So when you go to do combat, you start looking at several things, and this is a good idea to go back to your charts there using the F6 in the combat chart. This is a straight up kind of each person rolls a die, the attacker versus the defender. You cross-reference it with how big the manpower is, or the combat value of the units involved, and what's the difference between the high roller and the low roller. And that tells you what the outcome is. And so, for example, I'll just do a quick combat here between Walker, who is he's going to try to attack across that creek, or across that river there, with his units. And the first thing you do is you assess all the different modifiers. Essentially, there's a tactical modifier, there's a ratio modifier of comparing the size of the two armies, there's artillery, and anything else. So like attacking across this small river here would then give some advantages to the defender. So, for example, Walker, if he was attacking, the first thing you look at is the tactical difference. So he's got a 3 versus Wood's 2, so that gives a +1 in favor of the attacker. Then you look at his manpower ratio. He's got an 8 going against what is essentially a 10, so he's a 1 to 2, which is a -1. So that pretty much wipes out his tactical modifier right there, so they're still back at 0. Then you look at the artillery. He's got a 1, and they've got a 2, so again, you're going to take some negatives there because he's attacking into a really bad position. So probably take at least a -1 or 2 on that. So now he's at a deficit making his attack. And you can attack at different power levels depending on whether you're performing an assault or if you are just attacking on the march. So you have 2 options there. You can roll really high, start moving the army towards this target, and then expend points that are left over towards an attack on the march. And if you have high enough left over, which is like 4 movement points, then you can kind of get a +1. Or if you're like Walker, he could just say, all right, we're starting the morning, and I'm going to attack just the adjacent hex. That's an assault. And he gets a +1 bonus for that. So you would just kind of add up all these modifiers, positive, negative, come to the final outcome, and then it just comes down to a die roll. So I'm looking at like a -1 or 2 with the creek and everything. So I'd say, all right, rolling 2 dice, the first number is going to be the attacker, and the second number is the defender. And you can see a 4 versus his 5. So it comes out to be like a 2 to his 5. So that's pretty bad. That would be easily repulsed. And I'm looking at like on the chart here, -2, and I'm attacking with an 8. So I would take 2 manpower loss, which in all of these scenarios is really the victory conditions of how many men you can inflict casualties to versus how many you lose. And so obviously whoever can lose the fewer casualties is going to do a little better on the victory points. But you also see there's a big D there, which means they become disorganized. So that's, all things being equal, they will then become, flip them over and become disorganized, and the unit will decrease in size a couple steps there. So there's conventional wisdom on when is an appropriate time to attack and when to avoid the attack. And this game rewards people that can position themselves into improving their modifiers. One of the big ways that you can improve the modifiers is to do flank attacks. And this is one of those things that confuses some new people, so I'll kind of walk through it here just in steps, and I'll move some of these pieces around just to show you some examples of it. But for example, let's say I got Hindmen up here, and for whatever reason I got Wilder's unit here, and I'll put Buckner's entire corps right here. There we go. In this game, there's a couple different ways that you can flank an enemy unit. And it all has to do with the application of coverage of the surrounding hexes. So every unit on the board exerts a zone of control all the way around it. The only place that they don't easily exert one is across rivers, major rivers, or across woods, hex sides right here. So for example, the one to the northeast of Hindman at 4229, they do not exert any zone of control into those woods because of the tree line. So, but in all other cases there, every one of those units is covering hexes all the way around them, or exerting zone of control. So in this situation here where these two guys are approaching Wilder, if one of them were to attack right now, the flanking calculation is basically how many hexes do you cover, and if you cover 4, then you get nothing. If you cover 5, then you get a +2, and if you cover all 6, then you get a +4. And then you degrade that modifier based on if they have friendly guys nearby, or if there are rivers or hex sides that are covered by mountains or other terrain. But in this situation here, because of Buckner's placement in Hindman, Wilder would be attacked at a +2 because they cover 5. So 40-30 where Hindman is, 42-30 Buckner, and then I think it's 41-32. So they all have coverage of the zone of control. Now the most extreme version that you're trying to get when you attack is like this. You can get each unit on opposite sides of your defender, then right there that's looking at a +4 flank, which obviously is the key to this game, is flanking your enemy through maneuver. And the way you can do it is you can do it with cavalry. I think the only restriction is that it has to be at least 25% the size. So Wilder's unit, let's say they were a 10, I'd have to have at least a 3 manpower unit adjacent to them to help out with the flank. So flanks are absolutely key to improving your die roll modifiers, and also for inflicting more casualties on the retreat, which I'll talk about as soon as I catch my breath. Are there any questions so far?